Maybe editing all that bone tomahawk footage for my last video has me in a specific mood, but I think today is the day we finally talk about not only one of the greatest westerns of the modern era, but what's considered by many to be one of the foremost defining examples of prestige television in the so-called Golden Age as well. Deadwood has the reputation as being one of those shows like Rome or Hannibal that were canceled almost tragically before their time, and in a sense it was. You know, it would have been nice to see where things were going with Jack Langrish and the acting troupe, or those two brothers and their Tinder scam, or the wider implications of Al arming Deadwood's Chinese population. But to be honest, I actually feel like the third season, down to the final line of the final episode of Deadwood, represents the perfect ending point for that show and for the story being told. Aside from the absence of some traditional climax or finale, I think the main reason people have often found Deadwood's ending to be incomplete is the way the show left things with George Hearst. And I have to hand it to Gerald McRaney, he really made the character stand out as particularly vile, ugly, and unstable, even in a show full of vile, ugly, and unstable villains.
You seem distraught.
I am not! I await an outcome, and the readying for it wearies me.
Oh dear.
Have you smelt human flesh on the spit?
How would I have?
I know the smell.
You have been to and fro in the world.
It pleased me to find out.
Well then, fine.
The thing where he talks about the earth like a woman he's trying to dig something out of especially is just so creepy, and he has such an entitled, impotent personality. There's such a smallness to the way he makes people suffer to assuage perceived wounds to his own ego. Everything about the character just cries out for someone or something to give him what he deserves. Deadwood, after all, had always been a show about justice. Compromised, uneven frontier justice, but justice nonetheless. Right from that first scene of the first episode of the show where Bullock places himself between a condemned man and the lynch mob.
I'm executing sentence now and he's hanging under color of law. You called the law in, Samson. You don't get to call it off just because you're liquored up and popular on payday.
Bullock and Utter hunt down Jack McCall and take him to stand trial. Wu gets one thief's life for the murdered courier. The woman-killing geologist is dragged into the street and beaten bloody. Deadwood told us again and again that if you do terrible things, you will face consequences for it. Doesn't matter if that means the sheriff himself walking into your saloon in the middle of the day, tackling you off the balcony, and giving you a five-fingered lesson right there in the mud of the thruway. Even when EB gets beaten up for something he didn't do, most observers seem to agree that he had it coming for something.
He seems to need that.
Hell of a beating for EB to take if he's innocent.
He's still way ahead of the game.
As an aside, by the way, I don't think I've ever encountered a villain that elicits quite as much simultaneous contempt and pity from me as E.B. Farnham.
I imagine the pool that spawned you. I am filling it with rocks. I am holding shut your gills to prevent you from taking in air.
Don't you want to wipe that off?
No?
You would regret my coming back and finding that you had cleaned your face.
I understand.
So there's this question the show keeps teasing us with coming up to the season 3 finale. Who is going to give George Hearst the justice he deserves? Will he get a hashtag Bullock beating? Will there be some shootout between his Pinkerton goons and the men Wu and Hawkeye were recruiting? Will Al kill him personally? Or Tolliver? Or even E.B.?
I'm going to fuck you up. I'm gonna fuck you up. And I'm the kind of cunt you let close.
But none of that ever happens. Trixie wings him with her Derringer, and Bullock kinda punks him out a little, but otherwise all of Hearst's megalomaniacal predictions about getting what he wants on his own terms turn out to be accurate. He cuts off Al's finger, has Aunt Lou's son killed, murders Ellsworth, rigs the election to usurp Bullock, and not only does he get away with all of it, but he takes possession of the gold claim everyone was fighting over in the first season as well.
Elections cannot inconvenience me. They ratify my will, or I neuter them.
Now, it's understandable that, as an ending for the series, this might leave you feeling like something's missing. But I think that's deliberate, and I don't think it makes the story incomplete. The missing piece you feel is putting a point on the statement the show makes in depicting actual U.S. Senator, businessman, and robber baron George Hearst in the way that it did, revealing the promise of frontier justice as a pretty lie the show was telling us. There's no justice for men like George Hearst, because in any system ruled by greed that manipulates scarcity, the wealthy will always be able to twist the social order to their own advantage and shield themselves from consequences for their crimes.
When I was in Campeche, You wrote a letter in my behalf.
To the Jefe de Policia.
I am aware of Mr. Wolcott's difficulty. You will find me personally grateful for any adjustments you may make in his case.
It's pretty undeniable that the Deadwood movie was blatant wish fulfillment for all the fans who've had this stuck in their collective craw ever since the show ended. I'm not saying that's a bad thing or that I didn't like the movie, but that's what it is. Trixie emasculates Hearst basically the second he rolls back into town. His goons lose a gunfight with Bullock and Al's goons, he's outbid by the widow Ellsworth while sucking on a big phallic cigar, and finally the entire town of Deadwood gets a shot at him before Bullock drags him by his ear again into a cell. And it did make me happy to finally see that the Bullocks grew into a real family, and that Aunt Lou stayed behind in Deadwood and found a place for herself, and that Joni took over the Bella Union, and of course.
Show her a sign of loving regrets from Calamity Jane to her darling.
There's nothing wrong with wish fulfillment sometimes, and just because the film is wish fulfillment doesn't mean it's less honest than the show. Something I think the movie depicts really well is this sensation of coming back to a thing or a place after a long time, and the way some things will change and grow and wither while others remain seemingly immutable. Al is an old man now, his henchmen more taking care of him than taking his orders. Trixie's still a self-indulgent asshole who gets way more chances than she deserves, while E.B. has evolved into his final form, literally scuttling through the walls of his hotel like a rodent. And it all just feels really true to what Deadwood always was, even if it says what it says a bit differently than the show did. And different doesn't mean worse. Believe it or not, I think there actually are some things that were handled better by the movie. Like, don't get me wrong, Newsmax Mario was funny and really well acted, and the character's point about the impotent foolishness of white rage was certainly well made, but in part because of this, I genuinely find a lot of his scenes a little difficult to watch, and it's part of why I might need to know someone kind of well before I'd really recommend Deadwood to them. I've seen people accuse Deadwood of using homophobic language as well, but I'm pretty sure they also gave Al a boyfriend in the 3rd season, and nobody ever talks about that.
I am barely speaking to you.
Who the fuck is that?
A shabby exit from Virginia City. No farewell, Jack. No by your leave. Few enough, I find tolerable. Lucky our paths have crossed again. Don't misinterpret that.
All right, Jack.
The person who suffered the most by the decade interim between the season 3 finale and Deadwood the movie, perhaps fittingly, is Al. His body's failing him and his mind is starting to drift away. Doc Cochran says he could improve and he still has people around who care about him, but it's also pretty clear he's not going to change his lifestyle, and more likely than not he's on his way out. But he's not gone yet, and also fittingly, he still gets the final word.
Our Father, which art in heaven.
Let him fucking stay there.
The film is very conscious of the fact that Al is probably most Deadwood fans' favorite character, and that he probably shouldn't be. Which is really another thread picked up from the final season of the show.
You're killed, sir?
Who?
Animal.
Oh, no, fuck no, I'm a fucking terrible shot. Work better closer in.
Al Swearingen is the quintessential charming cutthroat, and even though we knew who he was from the beginning, along the way he still kind of charmed us, only to draw the blade across our necks when we let him close. He has all these humanizing scenes throughout the final season, crying about his mother or singing to himself behind the Gems bar while everyone else is performing at amateur night. He even gets to play the classic Western hero for a moment, jumping off the saloon's balcony to protect the widow Ellsworth from gunfire.
And I'll tell you this. You don't seem halfway like such a halfway bad fucking person.
All that shouting? You're a cunt for hire to shoot at women and the like? Just trying to frighten you a little. Encouraging you to chat. Who amongst us hasn't wanted to shoot at women once or twice?
All of these things, Al's redemption, Hearst's comeuppance, and the myth of frontier justice come together and play out in microcosm in the show's final episode, Tell Him Something Pretty. Trixie tries and fails to kill Hearst after she sees Ellsworth's body being carted through the center of town, and he demands her life for it. Hoping he wouldn't tell one blonde from another, Al decides to kill Jen, another prostitute working for him, and give her body to Hearst in Trixie's place. Johnny offers to do the deed himself, claiming Jen is afraid of Al, but he can't go through with it, and puts himself between Al and the girl, saying he'd be willing to die to stop him, but asks Al to find another solution. And for a moment we hope he will. That maybe Al is not such a halfway bad person, that he'll come up with some kind of Michael Ehrmantraut type creative MacGyver solution to appease Hearst without killing anyone.
Make sure the whore don't leave, let Johnny cool down, then knock him the fuck out.
What's gonna happen?
What's gonna happen is I'm gonna go look and see if, perchance, I mightn't be the owner of another fucking knife.
We don't see Al kill Jen, but we know what happens after she steps into his office, even before it's confirmed or we see her body being used as a prop. The final scene of the show is Al, as we've seen him so many times before, scrubbing a bloodstain from the floor of his office. Johnny comes in and asks if Jen suffered, to which Al replies he was as gentle as he was able to be and that he doesn't want to talk about it anymore. Then, when Johnny leaves, he delivers the line which I believe is responding to all of our feelings about the character, the whole ordeal with George Hearst, and the closing chapter to Deadwood.
Wants me to tell him something pretty.
Satan, he got mad, missed that